News of the Times. The Finsbury Park shooting. The jealousy murder of Jane Messenger. True crime from 1880. London, 1880. A cold October afternoon. Families strolling towards Finsbury Park. Nothing unusual until 3 gunshots tear through the quiet, and a woman collapses to her knees, hands raised in desperate supplication. Her name was Jane Messenger, 29 years old, respectably dressed, married, and until recently entangled in a deeply fraught domestic arrangement involving her husband and the brother-in-law who had been living under their roof. Her killer, a man who had crossed half the world from Australia, convinced he was heir to an enormous estate and equally convinced that Jane's decisions could destroy his future. Within seconds, he fired 3 rounds at her heart. Witnesses ran. Her clothes caught fire. A bullet dropped from her stays, and as police dragged the assailant away, he gave them a single chilling line. There was an object I had in view, and if she would not agree, I meant to do what I have done. Today, we're stepping inside one of the Victorian era's most shockable public murders, a case where jealousy, delusion, financial fantasy, and a deeply troubling domestic arrangement collide in full daylight before horrified bystanders. This is the story of the Finsbury Park murder, the jealousy killing of Jane Messenger, a tragic case where Victorian policing, medical evidence, public spectacle, and psychological unravelling converge in a single devastating minute of violence. And in this evening's further particulars, we present the tale of a man who was absolutely determined to be heard. Sadly for the House of Lords, he chose their window as his literary agent. What follows is a saga of broken glass, unfinished pamphlets, and an author who was, in every sense, desperate for a review. So, sit back, beverage in hand, we are not judging, and get ready to travel back to 1880s London. Jane Messenger was a 29-year-old married woman living in Edward Square, the Caledonian Road, sharing a modest household with her husband, Henry Messenger, a wood-turner, and their young daughter. Their marriage was, by multiple indications, deeply unhappy. Neighbours whispered of poor treatment, and Henry himself admitted hearing that his wife had complained of him, although he denied knowing anything officially. In August 1880, Jane made a decisive break. Henry returned from work to find drawers emptied, boxes gone, and both she and the child vanished. Jane had left with her brother and her brother-in-law, William Herbert, her sister's husband, who had been lodging with them since March. What followed was a period of unsettled living and emotional drift. Jane and Herbert took lodgings together at Stoneleigh Street in Notting Hill. Through propriety was maintained outwardly, Jane slept in the landlady's bed, and Herbert shared a room with her brother. Yet the nature of their relationship was unmistakably to those around them. Herbert himself would later call Jane the best friend I ever had. For roughly 8 weeks they lived in this improvised arrangement, during which Jane's movements suggested ambivalence, conflict, and dependence. She left Herbert, returned to her husband, asking about a possible separation order, and then spent the night with Henry after an evening at Deacon's Music Hall. Days later she returned to Notting Hill, only to leave again, telling the landlady she was going home. By the 21st of October, she had recommitted to trying her marriage again, securing 2 rooms in Albion Street, where she intended to live quietly with Henry and their daughter. It was the next day, the 22nd of October, that she agreed to walk with Herbert in Finsbury Park to talk matters over and declare to him categorically that she was going back to her husband. She would not return alive. William Herbert arrived in London in March 1880 after a long and financially difficult journey from Australia. Described as 54 years of age, respectably dressed and at times strange in his manners. He had lived for many years in New South Wales with his wife, Jane's sister, and their children. In Australia he was poor, struggling to raise even the passage money for England. The journey was undertaken for one reason. He believed his wife, residing in Australia, was heir to the Stockwell Park estate, which he understood to be worth around 160,000 a year, value approximately 25 million in 2026. When he reached London, he discovered the truth. There was an elder brother alive and therefore no inheritance at all. This crushing disappointment appears to have been the beginning of Herbert's unravelling. He lodged with the messengers in Islington and stayed there rent-free. During this period, he formed an increasingly intense attachment to Jane, whom he later referred to as his best friend. When she left her husband on the 15th of August, Herbert left with her, taking the child and her brother as well. They moved between modest lodgings in Notting Hill and Walmer Road, where Herbert's behaviour fluctuated between brooding, erratic and secretive. He purchased laudanum on at least 2 occasions, bottles later discovered in the lodging house, prompting Jane to accuse him of intending to poison her. Herbert became terribly excited, a reaction suggesting not romance but agitation and instability. 2 bottles in 2 weeks suggested not an accident, but a man wrestling with either despair, control, or both. On the 22nd of October, Herbert bought a new 6-chamber revolver, loaded it with 6 cartridges, and persuaded Jane to walk with him in Finsbury Park to speak with her. Inside a piece of newspaper, he also packed a butcher's knife. It was just after midday in Finsbury Park, a quiet, chilly autumn afternoon. Couples strolled along the paths. The lake sat still beneath a grey sky, and nothing hinted at the violence about to erupt. But a few park goers noticed something odd. A couple walking slowly, the woman glancing back more than once. Several witnesses later recalled seeing a man and a woman walking together, talking in low, tense tones, even quarrelling at moments, although nothing that suggested danger. Then, without warning, 3 sharp cracks split the air, echoing across the Seven Sisters Road entrance. People turned, policemen ran, and in broad daylight, in the heart of a public park, a woman lay collapsed on the path, blood spreading beneath her shawl, while the man beside her attempted to harm himself before officers could intervene. Within minutes, the Victorian press was reporting a murder so sudden, so public, and so bewildering that early editions couldn't even name the victim. From the Globe, the 22nd of October, 1880. Supposed murder near Finsbury Park. At 1 o'clock this afternoon, 3 shots were heard fired near the Seven Sisters Road. Several policemen ran in the direction of the reports, and reaching a spot near Finsbury Park, they found a woman lying on the ground, bleeding from a wound in the left breast. A man was standing near her, and he attempted to stab himself. He succeeded in inflicting a slight injury upon himself before the police could prevent it. The woman was conveyed to a hospital, but she died in a cab on the way thither. The man, on being taken to the police station, said he lived in the Caledonian Road and that the woman was his wife. They were both respectably dressed, but their names could not be ascertained. The attack caused instant shock. A shooting in broad daylight in the middle of a respectable Finsbury Park was something Londoners were simply not prepared for. Word travelled fast across the city, and by late afternoon the newspapers were already rushing out special reports. A woman dead, a man detained, witnesses shaken, and no one yet sure who they were or why the attack had taken place. Within hours, the case had become headline news across the capital. A public tragedy witnessed by dozens, unfolding in one of London's most peaceful green spaces. From the London Daily Chronicle, the 23rd of October 1880, murder at Finsbury Park. A tragedy involving the murder of a woman and a desperate attempt by a man occurred about noon yesterday in Finsbury Park. A respectably dressed man and woman were walking together toward the park gates in Seven Sisters Road, when on a suddenly he drew forth a revolver and fired thrice at her breast. The tragedy was begun and proceeded with thus far in a moment of time, and the few passers-by, with all their expedition, had only time to rush. The news soon got wind, and people came streaming toward the scene. The superintendent of the park, a Mr. Cochrane, and several police constables were quickly on the spot, and the man and his intended victim were removed under the direction of Dr. Berry of Seven Sisters Road. She was taken with all dispatch to the Great Northern Hospital, where she was found to be dead. Life was not quite extinct when she was taken up from the inn, but she succumbed to her wounds in the cab. Dr. Worry, on examination, found one of the 3 shots lodged in the immediate region of the heart. Another shot, it was found, had struck against her stays and thus had been prevented from entering her body. As for the assailant, he was taken into custody and taken to the Hornsey Road police station by constables 169 and 413 of the Y Division. While in the charge room at the station, awaiting inspection by the doctor, the man, who gave the name of William Herbert, and who appeared a little over 30, while not very communicative, said a few things about himself and his rash deed. He stated that the woman upon whom he had committed the murderous assault was his sister-in-law. He added that he had lately arrived from Australia, where most of his friends were. On the way to the hospital, he pointed to a house in the Caledonian Road, where he said the husband of his victim worked. At the hospital, a photograph of the murdered woman was found in his pocket, together with the card bearing these words: "My address is at Mrs. Pegler's, 91 Portobello Road, Notting Hill." The murdered woman, it appears, was married and lived with her husband in Edward Street in Caledonian Road. The constables who took Herbert into custody found in his possession the 6-chambered revolver with which he did the deed, and which is perfectly new, and a box of cartridges and a knife. It is worthy of mention that shortly before the occurrence of the tragedy, the couple were seen seated side by side near the lake and were apparently in friendly conversation. It was on their way to the park gates that the pistol did its deadly work. At present, no motive can be assigned as the cause of the case, but the police, judging by what Herbert has allowed to fall from his lips and by what circumstances have already come to light, lean to the assumption that jealousy was the incitement which prompted the terrible act. The police are making active inquiries at Notting Hill, in the Caledonian Road and elsewhere, and were so occupied late last night, when the results of their research had not transpired, the officers had not returned to the station. No relatives either of the man or of the deceased woman have as yet made their appearance. No friend of Herbert had called at the hospital. Herbert has made a statement to Dr. Corder, who has charge of him at the Royal Free Hospital. He said, "I am an independent gentleman, but I have no home in England. I have killed the best friend I had in the world. I know I shall have to swing for what I've done. I've been in England for about 8 months. I came from Australia, where I have left a family and a wife. The deceased woman was my sister-in-law." A constable of the Y Division is on watch beside the prisoner, who is legally in custody. The shooting at Finsbury Park did more than shock the officers who first arrived on the scene. By the next morning, the case had gripped the imagination of London entirely. There was no back alley quarrel among the desperately poor. Reporters were quick to note with a certain Victorian relish that both parties were respectably dressed, and that the scene of the crime was one of the capital's most genteel public spaces. A woman of good appearance shot in broad daylight, and by her own brother-in-law. It was a scandal with every ingredient the newspapers and public followed eagerly. Fleet Street moved swiftly. By noon, investigative journalists were tracing the antecedents of both victim and assailant, rummaging through lodgings, questioning neighbours, and piecing together the tangled web that stretched from Islington to Notting Hill and half a world away to Australia. For Victorian readers, the revelation that William Herbert was married to the deceased woman's sister and had been living under the same roof as the messengers for months added an extra shudder. The domestic triangle, the broken marriage, the sudden attachment, and the public violence, all of it combined into a narrative that society devoured with morbid fascination. From here, the newspapers began to unspool the lives behind the headlines, who William Herbert really was, how he came to London, and how this unlikely chain of events placed Jane Messenger on a quiet October pathway, moments from death. From the Liverpool Echo, the 25th of October, 1880. The Finsbury Park murder. Further details. The murder of Jane Messenger, William Herbert, who is 53 years of age and who, although in the Royal Free Hospital, is nevertheless in custody, is said to be much better. Herbert is willing to converse on almost any topic except that having reference to the recent tragic event. Dr. Corder thinks there is a fear of death supervening for the next few days. On Saturday, Mr. Messenger, the husband of the deceased, called and saw the house surgeon, but did not see his brother-in-law. The inquiries set on foot by the police have disclosed the fact that Herbert has been for some 8 months in England. He is said to have come from Australia and has property and wife in that country. For some time past, he has been living at 133 Walmer Road, Notting Hill, and for about 8 weeks the victim of the outrage of Friday, Mrs. Jane Messenger, the wife of Henry Messenger of 41 Edward Square, had been living with him. It appears that Thursday last she had left him and returned to the above address to live again with her husband, and Herbert then followed her over to Edward Square and induced her to accompany him into the park where the crime was perpetrated. It is tolerably certain that the prisoner proceeded to commit the deed with a great deal of deliberation, as he had provided himself with a new revolver and a box containing fewer than 44 carriages. 6 of these had been used loading the revolver, and the rest were found upon him when taken to the station. He likewise had a large knife similar to those used by butchers for cutting meat. It appears the deadly attack was witnessed by several persons. Mr. Bradley, who assisted in securing the prisoner, now states that when he passed along the path in Finsbury Park, the 2 persons were quarrelling very loudly. Mr. Alcock also saw the pistol fired 3 times and afterwards assisted in wresting it from Herbert's hands. Mr. Bradley and Mr. Alcock will be called at the inquest, which is fixed for tomorrow and the Holloway at 5 noon. The police have received many statements from various sources, and several relatives both of the deceased and Herbert will be forthcoming at the inquest. The motive which induced the perpetration of the crime was, in all probability, jealousy on the part of Herbert, who endeavoured by every possible way to dissuade the deceased from returning to live with her husband. With witnesses identified, statements gathered, and public interest growing by the hour, the next step was the formal machinery of Victorian justice. Whatever the newspapers might speculate, it fell to the coroner's court to determine, calmly, legally, and on sworn testimony, how Jane Messenger met her death, and by what means, and at whose hands. The inquest would bring together those who had seen the shooting, those who knew the parties involved, and the medical men who examined Jane's wounds. In the days ahead, this process promised not only to clarify the sequence of events, but to reveal the deeper tensions and private conflicts that led to a fatal confrontation on a quiet October afternoon. And so, with the eyes of London upon it, the inquest into the death of Jane Messenger commenced. From the London Daily Chronicle, the 27th of October, 1880. The inquest. Yesterday, at the coroner's court in the chapel of E's burial ground, Holloway, Dr. Hardwick, coroner for Central Middlesex, held an inquest touching the death of Mrs. Jane Messenger, aged 29, who was shot in Finsbury Park under circumstances already reported to the public. The first witness was Henry J. Messenger, the deceased's husband, a wood-turner of Edward Square in Caledonian Road. He stated that he and Jane had one child, a little girl. On the 16th of August, he returned home to find his wife gone, drawers emptied, boxes removed, and learned she had left with her brother-in-law, William Herbert, who had been lodging with the family since March, along with her own brother. Herbert, Henry noted, had never paid for his keep. In the weeks that followed, Jane's movements were unsettled. She visited Henry, asked whether he would consent to a separation order, and was told he would take her back if she wished to return. She spent an evening with him at Deacon's Music Hall and stayed overnight before going back to Notting Hill. Earlier that week, she had taken 2 rooms in Albion Street, where the couple planned to live together again. On the Friday morning, Henry left for work at 8:30. That afternoon, his sister-in-law arrived with a constable and told him there had been an accident at about 3:30. When pressed, she revealed that Herbert had shot Jane. Henry continued at his work until the evening, when word reached him that his wife was at the mortuary. He viewed the body the following morning and formally identified her. Mr. Arthur James Worry, house surgeon at the Great Northern Hospital, said the deceased was brought into the Great Northern Hospital on Friday last at about 1:30 p.m, quite dead. On examination of the body, he found a circular wound on the left side between the third and fourth ribs, which he was told was from a pistol shot. There was a bruise under the bone of the front of the stays. The bullet was lodged at the back, near the sixth rib. He had not the slightest doubt that death was caused by that wound. John Bradley, railway agent of 25 Chatterton Road, Finsbury Park, deposed. At about 12:15 on Friday afternoon, I saw a man and a lady in Finsbury Park walking on the north side in the inner circle path toward the lake. After that, I saw them sitting down opposite the lake. The man appeared to be trying to take something from the lady. She had her handkerchief in one hand, and I passed them within 8 or 10 yards. I thought it strange that they should be sitting down in the open air on such a cold morning, and just then it began to rain. I was going towards Blackstock Road when I heard a shot. They had got up and were coming down the same path as myself. Hearing the shot, I ran in the direction of it. It was about 80 yards from them. He had hold of her shawl with his left hand, which was pulling her, and with his right hand he fired at her for the second time. I put on as much speed as possible. Before I got to them, she fell on to her knees, and by that position of her hands she seemed to be imploring him to spare her, upon which he pointed the revolver at her breast and fired for the third time. She fell forward. I was close to him by that time. He had the revolver in his hand still. I was puzzled how to act for a moment. The next I saw of the revolver was that it was on the grass. I did not see him drop it. I felt certain he intended another shot. In the meantime, 2 or 3 other persons were present. A gentleman picked up the pistol, which Herbert made a rush to get. I took it from the gentleman in order to secure it from Herbert, who cried out, "Let me have it." I put it in my coat pocket. Revolver produced. Afterwards, I gave it to a constable who came to the scene from Blackstock Road, and who took Herbert into custody. I saw the policeman and Herbert get into the cab, which I followed to the Hornsey Road police station. I heard afterwards that he had been taken to the hospital. Following the cab, I left the lady in the care of several persons. She appeared to me to be quite dead. When Herbert was trying to get the revolver, I saw something sticking out of his right hand pocket, and he seemed anxious to get it out. It was a knife wrapped in newspaper. I heard that the knife was afterwards thrown out of the cab window. The next witness was Police Constable Samuel Taylor of the Y Division. He stated that at about 12:30 he was called urgently to the scene, where he found a woman lying on the ground and a man being held by bystanders, who informed him the man had fired the shots. Taylor took Herbert into custody. Bradley, the previous witness, then handed the constable both the revolver and a small bullet which had fallen from the woman's stays as she was lifted. As Taylor escorted Herbert back through the park, Herbert made several attempts to reach for the revolver, prompting the constable to secure it firmly. At the park gates, Taylor obtained a cab, and as Herbert was getting into it, he removed a knife from his pocket and threw it out of the cab window, which Taylor immediately retrieved with the assistance of a nearby boy. During the journey to the station, Herbert produced a packet of cartridges from his pocket and handed it over. Police Constable Samuel Taylor continued, "On October the 23rd at 1:30, I made the following statement. His cousin came in and said, 'For God's sake, whatever made you do this?' The prisoner replied, and this is the statement, 'There was a certain object I had in view. I wanted to speak to her. I took a tramcar to Finsbury Park for that purpose, with the full intention of doing what I have done, if the interview was not satisfactory to me. The reason for my doing so, no one on this living earth shall know." Inspector John McFadden testified next. He stated that Herbert was brought to the station shortly before 1 o'clock on Friday, along with the revolver, knife, and a box of cartridges handed over by Constable Taylor. Examination showed that 2 live cartridges and 4 spent cases remained in the pistol, while the package of 50 cartridges now held 44. When asked for his address, Herbert could give only a partial one, a number in Notting Hill, and mention of a dairy, saying he had lodged there for a week in a room taken for him by the deceased. Inspector McFadden then described his inquiries. He located Mary Ann Messenger, the sister-in-law of the deceased, at Edward Square. She accompanied him to the Great Northern Hospital, where she formally identified Jane's body. From there, he went to inform the husband at his workshop and reported that Henry Messenger appeared to understand the gravity of the news even before it was outspoken. McFadden then visited Stoneleigh Street, Notting Hill, where Herbert and the deceased had lived for a time. They occupied one room during the day, while at night Jane reportedly slept with the landlady. Among Herbert's belongings, the inspector found several letters from his wife in Australia, dated as recently as the end of August, all concerning the hoped-for recovery of landed property, the matter that he had originally brought Herbert to England. V13. The next witness was Mrs. Sarah Debu, a widow of Stoneleigh Street, who had let a room to Herbert, and Mrs. Messenger, Jane's brother, was present when the lodging was taken, and although the pair originally asked for 2 rooms, it was eventually arranged that Jane would share Mrs. Debu's bed at night. During their stay, Jane confided several times that she had discovered bottles of laudanum in the room. On one occasion, she broke a bottle she found hidden beneath the grate. On another, she pointed out a fresh bottle on the mantelpiece shortly before leaving the house for the last time. Mrs. Debu kept this final bottle and later handed it to the police when they made inquiries. John Alcock, who witnessed the tragedy in the park, corroborated Mr. Bradley's evidence and added that he, the witness, picked up the revolver off the ground, upon which the prisoner caught hold of him and tried to regain it. The woman was on the ground, appearing to be dying, and was drawing her breath very feebly. He raised her head from the ground, which was wet, and rested it on his foot. Her clothes were burning. He put out the fire. When she was raised, a bullet dropped from her. People gathered round. She remained in the position witness had described until she was removed to the hospital. The inquest verdict. The coroner, addressing the jury, said the evidence seemed pretty clear and scarcely could be more so. The jury, as a body, indicated that they did not believe that course to be necessary and returned a verdict of wilful murder against William Herbert, and the inquest terminated. With the witnesses heard and the medical evidence laid bare, the coroner's jury reached their conclusion with little hesitation. Jane Messenger had died from the deliberate act of William Herbert. The inquest outcome was clear, and Victorian procedure now moved to its next and more formidable stage. From this point, the case passed from the hands of the coroner to those of the criminal courts. Herbert, still under guard, would stand before a magistrate and then be committed for trial on the capital charge. What had begun as a quiet walk through Finsbury Park was about to unfold beneath the full weight of English law. And so the matter proceeded to the Central Criminal Court, where Herbert's actions, his state of mind, and the tangled chain of events leading to that October afternoon would be examined publicly, formally, and in exhaustive detail. The trial of William Herbert was about to begin. From the London Daily Chronicle, the 25th of November, 1880, the murder in Finsbury Park. William Herbert, 54, described as having no occupation, was charged at the Central Criminal Court yesterday before Mr. Justice Hawkins, upon an indictment also by the coroner's inquisition, with the wilful murder of Jane Messenger. The Crown's case at trial was presented with striking brevity. The facts, they argued, were neither disputed nor obscure. The evidence that had been presented at the inquest was reviewed once more. William Herbert had purchased a revolver on the morning of the 22nd of October, had walked with Jane Messenger into Finsbury Park at midday, and had been seen by multiple witnesses firing at her 3 times at close range. She died almost instantly. The prosecution highlighted Herbert's own statements following the shooting, that he went to the park with a fixed purpose, that the outcome depended on whether Jane agreed to something he demanded, and that he had fully intended the result if she refused. These declarations, the Crown said, removed any question of accident or sudden impulse. No evidence of insanity had emerged. Herbert's actions, buying the weapon, loading it, seeking Jane out, choosing a secluded path, all pointed to deliberation. Whatever the nature of the object he had in view, the law required no knowledge of motives when the act itself was both intentional and fatal. The Crown concluded that the case was straightforward. A planned killing, carried out in daylight, witnessed by bystanders, and confirmed by the prisoner's own admissions. Nothing further, they said, was needed. For the defence, Mr. Gill urged the jury to look beyond the stark facts of the shooting and instead consider the prisoner's state of mind. Herbert, he argued, had been unhinged by the crushing disappointment of discovering that the vast fortune he believed awaited him in England did not exist. The collapse of this long-nurtured hope, he said, had profoundly unsettled him. There was, counsel stressed, no evidence of impropriety between Herbert and Jane Messenger, nothing to suggest jealousy, passion, or domestic rivalry. Without such a motive, the defence contended, the act must be viewed through another lens. Mr. Gill pointed to Herbert's behaviour in the weeks before the shooting, the bottles of laudanum found amongst his belongings, the written memorandum of his address in case anything should happen, and his anguished admission that he had harmed the best friend he ever had. These, he said, were not the actions of a rational man, nor was the choice to fire in a public park in broad daylight, or the prisoner's subsequent conduct at the station and hospital. Taken together, the defence suggested these incidents revealed a mind disordered by strain, disappointment, and obsession, a man not fully responsible for the act he committed. Whatever the jury's feelings about the crime, Mr. Gill employed them to weigh these considerations with our common humanity and to decide whether Herbert had truly been capable of forming a sane and deliberate intention on that October afternoon. Mr. Justice Hawkins, in directing the jury, reminded them that the burden of proving insanity lay squarely with the defence. It was not enough to suggest instability, it must be established to their satisfaction. The facts of the case, he noted, were not in dispute. If the prisoner were not insane, then the act appeared to have been committed without the slightest provocation. But that alone could not amount to proof of madness. The jury must instead ask what, in Herbert's conduct before, during, or after the shooting, truly indicated an unsound mind. If the horror of a crime were accepted as evidence of insanity, he cautioned, then no murderer would ever be convicted. Motive, too, was a fragile measure. Countless crimes were committed without one that could be neatly assigned. Furthermore, although many people had been in Herbert's company for weeks, not a single witness had come forward to speak to any persistent derangement in his behaviour. The defence had put forward the only argument available to them, but the question remained for the jury alone. Had there been shown clear proof that the prisoner did not understand the nature and quality of the act? The jury, without leaving the box, found the prisoner guilty. Mr. Justice Hawkins, having put on the black cap, addressed the prisoner and said that the jury had found him guilty of the crime of wilful murder without, as far as he could see, one single extenuating circumstance. The prisoner, who had displayed no emotion during the conduct of the case, was removed, apparently smiling. From that moment, Herbert waited in jail for his execution, a bleak, featureless vigil. No petitions were raised on his behalf. No influential voices stepped forward to plead for commutation. The case, so public in its violence, drew remarkably little sympathy for the perpetrator. In prison, Herbert remained largely silent, speaking only in measured fragments to the chaplain and the warders. Yet those fragments revealed the one truth he had refused to confess in court. There appears to be no doubt that the reason why he committed the crime was because the deceased, who was a married woman, refused to accompany him back to Australia, where he was preparing to return at the time he committed the murder. Thus, the motive that had eluded the newspapers finally emerged. Not madness, not sudden passion, but the cold determination of a man who could not bear her refusal and acted with fatal resolve. William Herbert was executed at Newgate on the morning of the 14th of December, 1880. Outside the prison, a large crowd had gathered despite seeing nothing more than the sombre signal permitted to them. When the black flag rose above the walls, a cheer rippled through the onlookers, a grim punctuation mark to a tragedy that had transfixed London. Inside, the man at the centre of it all had remained notably silent. Herbert refused visitors, offered no public explanation, and spoke little beyond the brief exchanges required of him. Yet, in fragments shared with the chaplain and prison officials, one thing became clear. Jane Messenger had refused to return to Australia with him, and he had decided that if he could not control her choice, he would end her life. It was a motive at once simple and chilling, not the result of a sudden quarrel or a passionate frenzy, but the final act of a man whose fantasies of inheritance, importance, and entitlement had steadily collapsed around him. In that void, he fashioned a twisted logic in which Jane's refusal became an intolerable blow. Victorian newspapers called it jealousy, others called it delusion. But at its heart lies a familiar pattern echoed across countless cases of the era. A woman attempting to settle the terms of her own life, and a man unwilling to let her do so. Jane Messenger, 29 years old, trying to navigate an unhappy marriage, shifting loyalties and the pressures of respectability, never stood a chance once Herbert had decided her answer must be yes. And so the story ends where so many Victorian tragedies do, with a woman whose choices were stolen from her, a man undone by his own imagined grievances, and a society that watched the final act unfold in broad daylight before attempting to make sense of it afterwards. Further particulars. And now for today's further particulars, we turn to a gentleman who took political engagement to rather literal heights. Some people write stern letters to the editor, others mutter at the newspaper. Our next fellow opted to break a window at the House of Lords and demand a publishing contract, as one does. From the Salisbury Times, the 13th of May, 1886, a supposed lunatic at the House of Lords. At the Westminster Police Court on Tuesday, Robert Hughes, 56, of military appearance, who seemed somewhat strange in his demeanour, giving an address at Oxford Street, was charged with wilfully breaking a square of glass in a window at the Crown Office in the House of Lords, the property of Her Majesty's Office of Works. Chief Inspector Denning of the House of Lords watched the case. Police Constable Stevens, 294, deposed that at 9:15 on Monday night he was on duty at the Crown Office at the House of Lords. As witness within 4 yards of the prisoner, he, the witness, saw the prisoner pick up a large flint stone and deliberately throw it out of the window, which then broke. Witness asked why he had broken the window, to which the prisoner replied, "I will give the magistrate my reason in the morning." The prisoner had another stone in his hand, but he didn't throw it. On the way to the station, the prisoner said, "I have a grievance against the peers for the way in which they have mismanaged the affairs of the country, and I blame them for the present condition of trade." The prisoner, who conducted himself in a very extraordinary manner, was the evidence was being given in his defence, said he had written a book which was going to enlighten the world, but he could not get anybody to publish it. He handed a bundle of papers up to his worship, one of which set forth that the words monarchy and religion did not appear to be altogether understood at present. On this subject, in the interior economy of the empire, I have written a pamphlet and take this opportunity to make it known to the public. A respectable publisher is requested to come forward to print and publish it expeditiously in a suitable form for the present occasion. The prisoner was remanded and removed to the cells, where he loudly declared that he would have his pamphlet published. And there we are. Tale concluded, papers unfolded, and another Victorian tangle neatly unravelled. If you've enjoyed our wander through the archives today, we'd be delighted if you support the channel in whatever way suits you best. A like, a subscribe, or perhaps sharing this episode with that friend, the one who still quotes Masterpiece Theatre and insists on solving the mystery before the detective does. You know the type. And of course, there's always the new favourite pastime across YouTube, pressing the magical hype button. It's exactly like the old buttons, only more magical. If you'd like to take the next step with us, we'd love to welcome you over on Patreon. For a modest £5 a month, you unlock a growing treasure trove of nearly 900 episodes, including full 7 series of exclusive things to members, plus monthly extras, early releases, and all the audio you could want for late night listening. But however you choose to join us, we're grateful you're here. This has been News of the Times, and I'm Robin Coles, curator of 203 mildly alarming, vaguely Pythonesque, interesting, ranging from Victorian stationery to taxidermied birds who look disappointed in one's life choices. Wishing you a splendid day, a quiet evening, and as ever, very good company. Until next time.